Hello, and welcome to Dark Hearts with Stacy Lee. I am so glad you're here today. So I'm on Netflix browsing for true crime documentaries to watch in the middle of the night because insomnia, and I come upon this show from 2023 that I've never heard of before. How does that happen? I watch everything. So I start watching, and when I tell you this is one of the craziest true crime stories I have ever heard, that's saying something. This case has so many twists and turns, so many unexpected revelations in it, that you'd have a hard time believing it was true if it wasn't so well documented. What starts out as a pretty cut and dried murder case quickly becomes something else entirely, when the boy at the center of this story finds out that his entire life has been a lie. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you'd like to see more from me. Today we are talking about the Anthony Templet story, I Just Killed My Dad. I'm your host, Stacy Lee. Let's begin.
I just killed my dad. What do I need to tell you?
So you said you just killed your dad?
Yeah.
Okay, and what's the address?
I think it's 17886 Great Moss Avenue.
Okay, and is he still alive or?
He might be, I don't know. There's blood on the floor, so I know he's at least been shot once.
Okay.
I shot 3 times at him. He's on the ground.
Okay, you shot him 3 times with a gun?
Yes.
Okay.
100%. Or at least I tried to. He tried to attack me. We got into a fist fight, and I ran in his room and locked the door and grabbed the gun. And I unlocked the door, and he tried to get. And then I shot him.
What you just heard is 17-year-old Anthony Templet, who called 911 in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, to tell authorities that he just shot his dad. It's 3:17 in the morning when the call comes in, and Anthony tells the dispatcher that there had been an argument at the house. The dispatcher tells Anthony to wait outside, and he steps out on the porch to wait for the police, who arrive shortly after the call is made. Anthony puts his hands in the air. He is handcuffed and taken into custody. He shows no emotion whatsoever. Officers make their way inside the home, which sits in a nice neighborhood. They find blood on the floor and a revolver lying on the kitchen countertop. An officer makes his way to the bedroom, where he finds this gun lying on the bed. Burt Templet is lying face down in the middle of the hallway in a pool of blood. The officer determines that Burt is still breathing. He is taken from the house by paramedics and loaded into an ambulance. Anthony was taken to the police station for an initial interview. There, he tells officers that it's just he and his dad living at the house. His stepmom and his stepbrother had recently moved out. Anthony says he has trouble getting along with his dad and flat out says, "I don't like him. He holds things over my head." Anthony tells investigators that Burt called him names and that his dad was controlling. There was an argument over Burt going through Anthony's phone, trying to find out if Anthony was talking to his own stepmother, who Burt was in a fight with. Susan Templet wouldn't talk to Burt, and so Burt didn't want her talking with Anthony. Don't get me started. This woman had been living with this boy for a long time, and he still had every right to have a relationship with her. Anthony tells police that the fight got physical, and he ran from his room into his father's room, where he locked himself in. While in the room, Anthony grabbed 2 guns from his father's storage space. He got 2 guns in case one didn't work. Anthony openly admits in this interview that he gave no warning. He says he was terrified and that he saw no other way to defend himself. He says Burt was trying to break in so forcefully that he broke the door. You can see here in these photos, the door is broken. While Burt was punching the door, he hurt his hand and he stopped for a moment. Anthony took that opportunity to open the bedroom door and begin shooting his father. He'd later say that he felt terrible, but he didn't see any other way. The thing is, Anthony didn't act as though he felt terrible. He has an incredibly flat affect and shows no emotion at all. The district attorney would later say that she finds Anthony scary and doesn't think he has any empathy. But we're going to talk about this. I don't know, because as you will see later on, this boy has endured massive trauma, and for some people, a flat affect is a trauma response. These photos were taken of Anthony. He had no injuries on him. There were no signs that he'd had to fight for his life. The home was spotless, not even a dirty dish. No overturned furniture, no sign of a struggle. As Anthony sat in his interview, Susan Templet was informed of what happened. She went to the hospital where Burt was on a ventilator in critical condition. 4 days later, she turned off the ventilator and Burt died. The cause of death was gunshot wound to the head. The manner of death was homicide. So Anthony was charged with manslaughter. This may be sounding familiar to those of you that saw the documentary or know this story, but I really want to focus on a couple aspects of this case today. As the police begin to ask around about the family, things get interesting. None of the neighbors knew the Templet family. The Templets didn't interact with anyone. People were upset about the murder and told the police that they knew Burt as a drunk. He was known to be an odd person who bragged about how much he could drink and even caused some confrontations with neighbors who ended up telling him, "Don't come back on my property." The neighbors tell the police they know nothing at all about Anthony. They never saw him outside, and when they would run into the Templets, like at the store, Anthony would just stand there withdrawn and not speaking. The few people close to Burt say he doted on Anthony and bought him anything he wanted. Burt and Susan met at a bar and they hit it off. Not long afterwards, Susan moved into Burt's house with her son, Peyton. Anthony was 7 years old at the time, and Susan said he was a fun kid who liked to laugh and he was carefree at first. But as time went on, Burt became more and more controlling and even abusive towards AJ, Anthony. Susan and Peyton call him AJ, but Anthony himself says he prefers to be called Anthony, so that's what I'm going to call him today. Peyton, the stepbrother, would later say that in his own way, Burt did love his son, but even that strange love was not returned. Anthony despised Burt. By 2019, Susan claims she was afraid of Anthony. She says he has no emotion, you cannot read him, and that his behavior is unsettling. Anthony would later say that his dad took his emotions away from him. And as he grew and got older, he had to pretend that he had no feelings at all. As Anthony is interviewed, something very strange happens. The cops ask him his birthday. Anthony doesn't know what year he was born in. He says it's either 2001 or 2002. So that's very odd. Anthony also doesn't know his own address. The police and the prosecutor begin to realize that something is not right here. Anthony told the police that he had no choice but to kill his father. A defense attorney then heard about this story and went to the jail to meet with Anthony, and by the time he left, he was frustrated. This attorney could not get anything out of Anthony. Anthony just didn't talk. The prosecutor went to talk to Burt's best friend, and this man described Burt as a braggart who didn't talk much about his work life. This guy that was supposedly his closest friend didn't even know what he did for work. It turns out Burt made a good living as an engineer. The family had a pool, a nice house, they took trips, and the Templets spent a lot of time around their pool drinking and cooking out. But Anthony did not. Anthony stayed in his room playing video games. And it's about this time in the investigation that police learn about the cameras. Burt Templet installed a very advanced camera system at the house. There were 8 outside cameras and cameras in every single room of the house, with the exception of the main bedroom. And these weren't just cameras that were triggered on when somebody walked in front of them. They were running 24/7. I've said before, my house is covered with cameras outside. I have 1 camera inside. I don't have a camera in every room. Now, if I had little kids, I probably would. But Burt was watching absolutely everything that went on at the house at all times. He watched the cameras from work. Even when he was home, he watched the cameras. Burt knew if anyone came near his house, and he knew where Anthony was at all times. Everything that went on inside and outside that house was not only caught on camera, it was recorded. And Anthony hated this. He had no privacy and no freedom, and I can completely understand his frustration. These camera systems weren't around when my kids were little, or even really when they were teenagers, but I can tell you I would never put a camera in my kids' bedroom. Once they're 5 or 6 years old, that is their space. Would I monitor their internet activity? I would, and I did, but I would never put a camera in their bedroom. That is incredibly invasive and inappropriate. Burt got Anthony a job at a plant nursery, and at that job, there was a woman who kind of took Anthony under her wing. The coworkers quickly learned that this kid was different. He had no exposure to the outside world. He didn't know who famous actors were. He didn't know how to give a high five. Somebody tried to give him a high five one day and he didn't know what that was. Anthony didn't understand jokes. He had no social skills. People at work also learned that Anthony had no relatives. It would be Thanksgiving, and they'd say, whose house are you going to for Thanksgiving? He'd be like, we're just staying home. I don't have any relatives. Anthony had been homeschooled. I'll contain it. I have a lot of new followers here. If you're here briefly, we have had a lot of discussions about homeschooling. I get that it works for a small percentage of people. I have also done this for a very long time, and I cannot tell you the number of cases we have covered where the kids are being homeschooled in order to control, manipulate, and cover up abuse inside the home. I am personally not a fan of homeschooling for those reasons and feel it should be much more heavily monitored, not in the government needs to be in charge of all schooling, but in an educational way, because some of these kids are being deprived of an education. Now, does that mean that I think everyone who homeschools their kids are bad people? Of course not. But here we are again. We have a kid who was being homeschooled because he was being controlled in a way that is, I don't want to get ahead of myself here, so I'll move on. It's just another, I was going to say notch on the headboard. That is definitely not the right saying. But it's another tally in the score of stories that we have talked about where kids that are homeschooled do something very, very out of the norm, or where kids are being homeschooled in order to control, manipulate, or abuse them. And here's the thing. Anthony couldn't tell his coworkers what his classes were at home. They said, well, what do you study at home? And he was like, I don't know. He wasn't being homeschooled. And then Anthony's coworkers found out that Burt had a GPS tracker on Anthony. The place where Anthony worked, being a plant nursery, would require Anthony to stand and water a group of plants for a long time, maybe 30 minutes or so. Burt would call Anthony's supervisor to ask why he hadn't moved in 30 minutes. I don't even know what to say to this. This is a 17-year-old kid. I had a baby at 17. This kid was being suffocated. He was being smothered. He was basically like a prisoner to his father. Later on, after the murder, this woman who had kind of taken Anthony under her wing, her name is Elena Fennell, she pulled Anthony's job application and realized that Burt had filled it out, and he lied about Anthony attending a prep school that he'd never been enrolled in. Now, there was, of course, another big question after the murder. Who was Anthony's mother and where was she? The cops asked. Anthony didn't know. He said he didn't know who his mom was or where she was. Anthony's supervisor at work, hearing all of this information, became so concerned that she called a friend of hers who had become involved in DNA research. This is Shayna Landry, who discovered years earlier that the man she thought was her father was not her father, and that generated an interest in DNA. She'd gotten really good at finding people's parents. So the two women, Elena and Shayna, decided they were going to try and find Anthony's mother. These women knew. They knew something was wrong and they followed their intuition, and I just love that so much. I absolutely love it when people like this know something is wrong and they do something about it. We say it all the time. If you see something, do something. So the DNA detective goes to work, and she finds out that Burt had been arrested several times for domestic violence, and one of those assaults was on a woman in Texas, and it happened the same year that Anthony was born. So the researcher, Shayna, began tracing Burt Templet's movement around the country, and she found a woman associated with one of Burt's old addresses. Her name was Natasha, spelled with an E, Netasha. And because of that unique spelling, Shayna was able to find this woman on Facebook. She pulled a photo of Natasha off of Facebook and sent it to Elena, Anthony's work supervisor. When Elena saw this photo, she knew immediately it was Anthony's sister. The two looked very similar. So Shayna, the researcher, sent Natasha a Facebook message, and 2 days later, she got a phone call. On the line was Natasha and her mother, Teresa Thompson. Shayna said, "Do you know someone named Anthony Templet?" And there was a long pause. Within a minute, Shayna was sent this photo. It was a missing poster. Anthony Templet was a missing child. His mother had been looking for him for 12 years. Shayna and Elena are heroes. They are heroes. Had Elena not been so compassionate towards Anthony, Shayna would never have been able to do her work. So I just want to make sure I give credit to these two women and to the documentary filmmakers, because I'm basically recapping the documentary today. This case doesn't have a lot of info online. And you know I love to talk about these types of stories. So Shayna delivered the news to Teresa and Natasha. Not only was Anthony alive, but she knew exactly where he was. He was sitting in jail for killing his father. And a whole new chapter of this story was opened up. This is Teresa Thompson, Anthony Templet's mother. This poor woman had been searching for her son for over a decade. Her little boy that she was very close with, who loved to plant flowers and spent time outside, had been taken from her life. Teresa was waiting patiently for Anthony to get a little older, maybe start searching for her on the internet. She says she had no idea where her son was because Burt Templet abducted his son and took him away from Teresa. Burt told his son Anthony that his mother was a junkie and he'd taken him away to protect him from her. Well, of course, Teresa wanted to talk to her son Anthony, so Shayna arranged a phone call at the jail. Teresa told Anthony during that call that she lived in Texas and told Anthony that he had two siblings. Anthony had always thought he was an only child. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. After the phone call, Natasha called a local news station and said, "Anthony has been secluded and abused all these years by his own father. My brave brother had to defend himself for the last time against that evil man." Shayla, the researcher, then contacted the police to inform them that she had discovered Anthony's true identity. The police learned that Anthony was not listed in the National Database of Missing Children. Burt was not wanted. Teresa had not pursued criminal charges against him for abducting Anthony. And of course, this seemed strange. We will get into some reasons later on. It's complicated. Teresa Thompson met Burt Templet at a crab shack in Louisiana, and the two started dating. Teresa was going through a rough divorce and liked the fact that Burt was fun to be around. The couple then moved to Houston, taking their 3 kids with them. In 2000, Teresa began to notice that Burt's behavior was becoming more erratic. He was a guy that always wanted to be the center of attention, and if he wasn't, it was a problem. One night when Teresa was cleaning the kitchen, Burt got mad that she wouldn't look at him, and he broke a bar stool. Teresa found out that Burt was doing a lot of Coca-Cola, and his moods became more and more irregular. She grew to be afraid of him. Burt started to control everything Teresa did. He had an explosive temper, and he began to beat on Teresa. And then she found out that she was pregnant with Anthony. Anthony was born, but the beatings continued. Burt was arrested several times and even did 6 months in prison in Houston. Teresa didn't leave, and when Anthony was 7 months old, Burt took off with the baby after beating Teresa badly for like a 10th or 12th time. Teresa called the cops. The police chased Burt down, but did not arrest him. Teresa decided to stop calling the cops because they didn't do anything to help her. Burt then started to talk to Teresa about getting a life insurance policy. She wouldn't sign the policy. She knew that Burt was going to get life insurance on her and then murder her. Teresa was so scared that she started leaving notes hidden around her house for the police to find after Burt killed her. The notes said things like, "If I'm found dead, Burt did it," stuff like that. Then one night, a friend of Burt's came to Teresa to tell her that she needed to pack her bags and go because Burt had paid him money to kill Teresa. So Teresa started throwing things into a bag, but the friend was like, "No, you have to go right now." Burt pulled into the driveway as Teresa was still there, and the friend told Burt he was going to kick his ass, so Burt left. Still, after this, Teresa stayed, and Burt came home and acted like the whole thing never happened. Teresa knew she had to get out. There was another terrible argument not long after that incident, but this time the argument was in front of Burt's own parents. His parents tried to stop the beating, so Burt kicked them out of the house. Teresa ran to the car with Burt's parents. Burt would not let Teresa take Anthony with her. So Burt's own parents drive off with Teresa in the car. They dropped her off at a bus station, and Teresa got on a bus and left Houston. She went to her mother's house. She was in bed for a week, recovering from the beating and trying to figure out how she was going to go back to Houston and get Anthony. She returned sometime later, but the house was empty. Burt was gone, and so was Anthony. In 2007, Teresa hired an attorney to begin looking for her son. She also got a protective order against Burt. The process servers that needed to serve the court documents found Burt. So he was fully aware that he was required to show up at a custody hearing, but he did not. He had vanished, and Anthony was gone. Teresa began searching surrounding elementary schools, looking for her son. She tried finding Burt, but soon it became obvious that he was trying to hide. Teresa spent $1,000 to print up flyers, and she began hanging them all over Houston. As she was searching, she called Burt's parents, and her son Anthony answered the phone. She said, "Let me talk to your grandpa and grandma," but they wouldn't talk to her. So Teresa drove to their house in Louisiana and pounded on the door. They wouldn't open it. I don't know why she didn't try and involve the police. I don't want to judge Teresa, and I don't want to make excuses for her either. I'll just tell the story. Teresa hung flyers all around the neighborhood where Burt's parents lived, and then she filed with the courts in Baton Rouge. A judge made Burt give Anthony back to Teresa. So she took him back to her house in Baton Rouge and thought she was done with Burt Templet, but she was not. Burt started stalking Teresa after she took Anthony home, but then it kind of stopped for a while and Teresa began to feel more at ease. Teresa later found out that Burt had hired a private investigator to surveil Teresa's house and to locate Anthony to make sure Anthony was still at the house. This story it's like I said, it sounds made up. Later on, Teresa even got copies of the reports generated by the private investigator. And then on June 15th, 2007, Burt sent the police to Teresa's house. Teresa wasn't home. Only her mom was there with Anthony. So there's a cop at the door. And this cop tells Teresa's mother that he had come to pick up Anthony because his father had been granted custody. Well, Teresa's mom didn't really know what was going on with the court case. And the cop told Teresa's mom, if Anthony doesn't come, then Teresa's going to be arrested. The cop takes Anthony by the hand and walked out with him through the door. Teresa gets home. She's furious at her mother for letting Anthony go. What neither of the women did not know is that Burt had filed a motion with the Louisiana courts in a different district stating that Teresa was a drug addict and that she was dangerous. That district court was not aware of the custody order issued by a separate court. And so that court ordered Anthony to go with his father. What now? I mean, if this happened in the 60s or the 70s, I could understand. This was 2007. The courts were online to some degree. That seems very bizarre to me. I don't know. Tell me if I'm wrong. The district court that was working with Burt ordered that he had temporary full custody. And at this point, Teresa she'd run out of money. Now, I would like to think as a mom, if somebody came and took my kid, I'm burning down the house to get my kid back. But I am also not somebody who had been drugged through a horrible legal battle, had been beaten very severely on multiple occasions. I mean, I have been hit, but she was exhausted. She was done. She did not have a way to continue paying for an attorney to fight this. And for Burt, this was all about winning. He didn't want Anthony. He just wanted to win, and he had beaten Teresa. She didn't have any more money or any more fight. So now we're back in Louisiana and Anthony is in jail. The prosecutor decided to try Anthony for manslaughter and not murder. Anthony was looking at no time to 40 years with manslaughter, but for murder, it's life. Anthony's attorney felt confident that these extenuating circumstances, the way he was treated, the way he was raised, the way his past was hidden from him, would be enough to sway a jury in Anthony's favor. But a grand jury indicted Anthony on charges of second-degree murder. The prosecutor was a bit surprised at that, and Anthony's attorney was angry. He was also worried because Anthony was housed at a very violent prison. Every day inside for this kid was terrifying, but he kept insisting that he didn't shoot his dad to kill him. He shot his dad to save himself. He shot his dad to get away from him and from the control and abuse. But seeing this prison he was in and the way this kid is, the defense attorney was very concerned he may end up here for the rest of his life. The prosecutor felt for Anthony, but at the same time, she was worried because of Anthony's flat affect that he might be dangerous. Anthony's attorney hired a psychiatrist to evaluate him, and this doctor stated that he did not believe Anthony was dangerous. And the prosecutor was moving forward. There were no injuries on Anthony, no psychiatric reports stating he was mentally ill, and he'd shot his father multiple times. She had genuine concerns about his stability and her legal obligations to pursue charges. Based on the psychiatrist's report, a judge allowed Anthony to post bail, and he was released awaiting trial. Susan, Anthony's stepmother, was allowed to be placed in charge of Anthony. Susan and her son Peyton picked Anthony up from jail, and I think that's admirable. I'm glad he had some support from them. Susan tells the reporter that Anthony is her child. She doesn't see him as a stepson, and that without her, he has nobody. I think Susan seems like a really amazing person with an incredible heart, and Peyton is just as supportive of Anthony and says he's there for Anthony regardless of what he needs. These are two, really amazing people for sure. Susan and Peyton had been told that Anthony's mother was dead. They had no idea that Anthony had been kidnapped. Now, as this documentary is being filmed, Anthony sits in this series of interviews I've been showing you screenshots from, and he's wearing an ankle bracelet. Netflix began following this story very early on, and so it's all really well documented. Anthony tells the interviewer that he blames his father for everything. He says that Burt stole his childhood and that had he had a different father, none of this ever would have happened. And while Anthony was out on bond, Susan began to tell her story. She was also being controlled by Burt. He watched her every move. She realized that the man she was married was not who he pretended to be in the beginning. Susan soon realized that Anthony had no education, and she asked Burt why they couldn't put Anthony in school. Burt would not even discuss it. Susan tried to help Anthony with basic math. He did know how to read and write, but that was about it. Burt had managed to live this very secretive life for a long time, but before the murder, things began to catch up with him. His son hated him, he was an alcoholic, he was miserable, and he had secrets. We're getting there. Anthony was growing up and beginning to realize that he was different from other kids. He was working now and he could see, I'm not like these guys. He was beginning to see that his dad was controlling him, and that scared Burt. Burt didn't like the fact that Anthony's eyes were being opened. He's basically a cult leader of a few people. The defense began to prepare its case. Anthony's attorney put together a mock jury and began to practice his case on them. As the defense attorneys listened to the feedback from the mock juries, Anthony's attorney realized there was a chance Anthony would be found guilty. Maybe not just of manslaughter, but of murder. The grand jury had indicted him for second-degree murder. This attorney hired experts on abuse to prepare statements on the psychological damage that's inflicted on kids who are treated the way Anthony was. But they were facing a big issue. Anthony himself admitted that Burt never physically abused him. Now, Anthony had called the police several times on Burt, but nothing was ever done. Burt never got arrested. Anthony became hopeless, and Susan wasn't doing much better. One night, Susan and Burt got into a heated argument, and Burt turned to her and said, "You have no idea what I'm capable of, little girl." This scared Susan so badly that she took Peyton and moved out, and they went to a hotel. It was this loss of control that pushed Burt over the edge. Susan even filed a restraining order against Burt, and this is why he was angry that Anthony was still talking to Susan. Susan backed her petition for a restraining order by detailing all of the abuse that she had suffered at the hands of Burt Templet, and then all of his secrets came out. Susan found out that Burt had been lying about being employed. He had lost his job months before this big fight due to poor work performance, and he had run up $80,000 in credit card bills trying to hide the fact that he had no income. This is very John List coded. It's very, I can see his face in my head. The dad that worked for the government, killed the whole family and then disappeared. He didn't get a promotion that he wanted. But yeah, Burt had been lying about having a job. So Anthony's attorney begins to gather all of Burt's many domestic violence arrests to show a decades-long history of violence. This attorney gathered evidence from Burt's employers for the reasons he was fired from his lucrative job. But in the end, all of the preparation and all of the research ended in a plea deal. Anthony's defense attorney did not want to risk his client spending the rest of his life in jail, even 10 or 20 years in jail. Anthony's attorney got with the prosecutor and was able to sway her with all of the evidence that he'd gather, and the prosecutor began to soften. In 2021, Anthony Templet pled no contest to negligent homicide. He was sentenced to only 5 years probation with time served. I have to say, Anthony's attorney, Jared Ambo, really fought for this kid. He took this case on. I'm sure he wasn't getting paid his full fee, and he fought for Anthony. Anthony Templet was free. For the first time in decades, he returned to his mother's house. He saw his grandmother and met his siblings. And here's what I really would like to talk with you guys in the comments about, especially if you have seen the documentary. It's still on Netflix if you have Netflix. Not everybody does, so I like to talk about these cases with you. At the end of the documentary, Anthony sits down to give a final interview. And for the first time, he broke down and began to cry. You could almost feel him release this thing that he'd been trying so hard to protect. He had such great control over his emotions for so long, and the softer life that he was living without Burt, it like broke that wall down, and he couldn't control his emotions anymore. He wasn't as hard as he'd been before. Earlier in the documentary, his eyes welled with tears and his lips quivered a lot. He does have emotions. Anthony does have emotions. They had just been buried so deep down for so long that he had totally lost touch with them. Do I think the prosecutor has some valid concern that he may be dangerous or do this again? I think anybody that does something like this is capable of doing it again. But my opinion on Anthony changed from the beginning of the documentary to the end. And if you've seen it, I would like to know if you felt the same way. He even looks different in the ending interview. He's softer. Anthony tells the interviewer he just wants to live a normal life. He says he wants to be happy and move on. The interviewer asks, "Do you think you can do that?" And Anthony replies, "Yes." The update is that Anthony is living that quiet, normal life now. I couldn't find him on social media, but I did verify that he has a girlfriend, that he spends a lot of time with her and her family. He is still in contact with his mother, Teresa, and his stepmom, Susan, as well as with his siblings. This documentary that I've recapped for you today left me feeling a bit hollow. There will never be any real answers because no one will ever know what was going through Anthony's head on the night he killed his father. Was this murder or was this an act of self-defense? I don't know. What I do know is that Burt Templet was an evil and vindictive man who did terrible things that hurt a lot of people. And what I do know is that I am relieved Anthony and Susan and Teresa are free of him. I hope that Anthony relishes this second chance at life and chooses to do amazing things with the time and the freedom denied him for so long. Thank you for joining me today on Dark Hearts. I'm really anxious to see what you guys have to say about this one. This is my podcast, Dark Hearts with Stacy Lee. It's on Apple and Spotify, and I post brand new episodes every Monday and Wednesday. Don't forget about our fundraiser. This is a perpetual fundraiser. I have a playlist on the channel called Fundraisers. You can watch this video and find out how you can help our community raise money to possibly solve a cold case. How you doing? It's a lot lately. There just seems to be so much craziness going on in the world, but especially in America right now. So don't forget to take a little me time, take a deep breath. Don't get too riled up. Don't get too angry. I'm talking to myself as much as anybody else. And remember that you've always got a home here. You are welcome and you are appreciated. Stay safe, my friends, and be kind to each other. And I will see you next time on Dark Hearts with Stacy Lee. Bye.